All right, hello, welcome to Return on Podcast. Tyler Jefcoat here with Seller Accountant, and of course, hosting this show. And guys, I'm interested in this discussion. I've had lots of talks here recently with guys that are giving us advice, counsel, next steps for how to really expand properly internationally, right? I mean, the wave of private equity money that came in or venture backed money that came in to buy us in the form of aggregators over the last 4 or 5 years, it really created a false positive for us as $1 million Amazon sellers. What it told us incorrectly, although at the time it was correct, just it isn't anymore. It told us incorrectly that the best business has five ASINs on one marketplace with as lean and mean an operation as possible. Now, I still think we need a lean and mean operation, but what's happened since interest rates have tripled and since the aggregator investments have gone down is we're having to run the fundamental blocking and tackling of our businesses more so than we did during the heat of the pandemic. And so I'm going to talk to my new friend here, Curtis Shoung, in this episode of Return on Podcast. He represents a fintech company called Airwallex, which is kind of a new age version of how do I manage efficiently with low expenses, the FX payments in and outs of getting money to and from Europe, UK, Australia, Asia, and the like. And I found this discussion to be interesting for the reason I just mentioned. We're having to do some things that we thought 2 years ago we could get away with not doing. We can't get away with those anymore. We're going to have to get better at managing our core logistics instead of depending on Amazon completely. And we're going to have to get better at managing our expansion so that our investors have a true picture of what the risk profile is of our brands. So, and again, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Curtis from Airwallex. Thanks again for joining Return on Podcast today. Let's dive in. It's time to maximize profitability and cash flow. It's time to learn habits and hacks from the best e-com CEOs. It's time for Return on Podcast with me, Tyler Jefcoat. All right. Today I am excited to bring in my friend Curtis Shoung to the show. Curtis, welcome to Return on Podcast.
Hey, Tyler, how's it going?
You know what? You and I were laughing about this a minute ago. It's good. And it's easier for me to say it's good right now because if you guys inside baseball here, we're going to post this in a week or two. But Curtis and I are here the morning after his beloved 49ers lost a heartbreaking overtime Super Bowl. I'm in Atlanta. My Falcons just lose like all the rest of the weeks and have nothing to do with the Super Bowl. But yeah, man, how are you holding up after a devastating overtime loss there?
If it was to a lesser quarterback, I'd be devastated. But you sort of have to just accept the fact that Mahomes is very, very good at his job. And like our team played well. We made a few mistakes, but like what are you gonna do, right? His resume is impeachable at this point.
You really do. As soon as you have to tip your cap and say, you know what, ran into the wrong dude. That dude is just different.
Like I was like, anyone else but him, I would have been like, yeah, give me the Ravens again. I know they crushed us in the regular season. Give me them again. Give me anyone else again. But like, what are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Well, Curtis, you're with a finance fintech company called Airwallex, and I want to get a little bit more into what you guys do. But I just want to start with kind of more of a free flow discussion. You and I we're talking about e-commerce. We're talking about the business environments that you and I operate in. And maybe just as an opening question, like what are you seeing right now in the e-commerce marketplace that's kind of on your mind? Like what's on your mind right now when you think about e-commerce and building these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, so so Airwallex, right? Like, really simple plug tagline. Like we help, make, global payments simplified, right? Like that's just like, that's it. Right. And so like I talked to a number of different partners in the e-commerce space, and obviously we have our own customers like globally. And what we're sort of like hearing, right? Like, and this has been the last few years of a number of different things, is sort of the need to go, sort of like go more global, but not for the reason that just like I want like purely money, but that's nice. But like sort of like prove out their business, prove out like there's less risk for their business. In just from the U.S. market, from international markets, from maybe post acquisition perspective. They're really trying to like go multi-channel a bit more, right? Like if you're 100% in Amazon, they're trying to like de-lever off of Amazon a little bit for, there's reasons there, right? Like higher fees and redundancies and, like risks, get more risk there. And yeah, and they're just trying to make it better. And another thing is like, I think almost to a T, everyone is more focused on their bottom line than ever before, right? They're all like much more like not quite penny pinching, but they're all like, oh, this is where my money's going for. This is what's like costing me money that I wasn't thinking about maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, right? It's
Right.
like, oh, this is costing me like $1,000 a month extra. I shouldn't be doing this anymore. I wasn't looking before because growth was so good, but now the growth is like growing at a more steady state versus like an exponential rate. You can like take a moment back to look at like, oh, hey, like why am I spending so much on this one thing there?
And everything you said makes sense because we have just come out of, Curtis, a few years, probably 5 really, where we experienced a few like irrational market forces. One of them was obviously the pandemic was terrible, but for e-commerce, it actually most categories was really, really good. We saw a lot of lift in our
Yeah.
business. Interest rates were at 0. So getting inventory was easy, getting cash was easy. And all of our venture capital funds and partners, all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, they didn't like Belks, they didn't like Macy's, they didn't like JC Penney anymore. They needed somewhere to put this money, and they started flooding it into this e-commerce space. Some of it you could call smart money, Curtis. Some of it you could not actually call smart money at all because of the kinds of investments they were making. I mean, uh, the landscape just was so weird because it forced us to focus and to be very insular and to not do some of the blocking and tackling some of the basics well. That I do think that now the business has evolved back to guys that are winning, guys that are exiting from maximum multiple are doing it by just building good businesses. Like, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, if we look back at that, like sort of like pre-COVID, COVID, like zero interest rate phenomenon time, right? There was like a formula you could have done, right? Like, hey, I sell this much on Amazon, I'm growing at this much rate, and my margins look about like right around this, right? But I don't do anything else. I don't have to worry about like how much marketing spend I'm doing. I don't have to worry about different marketplaces I'm selling or different regions I'm selling into. But I've hit like A plus B plus C equals like a 20x like exit, right? Because there's all this money and you could sell to an aggregator or whatever it might be because everyone was like forward pushing, like, oh, e-commerce is going to go on forever, right? It was like at 10% before, and now it's going to be 80% because of COVID, right? And that turned out to be not true, right? So I think that's like the whiplash is happening, right? Like, hey, everyone was so focused on trying to figure out how to like not like trick, but like work the math and the equation in their favor to get to those really high multiple exits, like, because all this free money was around, like as you're saying. But when that didn't happen, there's this giant whiplash effect happening that, oh, wait, you can't get a 20, 30x multiple anymore if you don't do all the other things right, right? All the blocking and tackling was not done right. And then you're like realizing, okay, well, the music has stopped. None of that happens anymore. And now they go back to looking like, okay, wait, what do I have to do to make this better, right? How do I actually get like a 5-10x outcome, hopefully, right? If I can't
And honestly,
reach
for
those stars.
e-commerce, I will say this, Curtis. The funds were able to raise money at like 25x or more. That's what these raises were for the
Yeah,
some of the big bits that are out there. The brands it was almost similarly irrational. Like we historically are in an industry that's not nearly as sexy as SaaS. We're getting like 3x multiples on exits, and they were
exactly.
getting all of a sudden 8x. And so all of a sudden it was just either way, it was a similar phenomenon. There was a quadrupling almost of the normality that you would expect within a market. And to your point, we're now seeing a regression back to, hold on, you can't just have a house of cards, put it on the market and get an outrageous multiple. You're going to have to have those fundamentals baked into your business. And you're going to have to, you mentioned this earlier, I want to kind of dig into it. You have to demonstrate to your investor that your risk profile is acceptable for the next stage of growth.
Yeah.
Like when you said that earlier, what did you mean by that? What does it mean to manage the risk profile perception of your investor?
Yeah, I mean, so your audience is quite smart here, right? And they're quite successful here in the e-commerce space. So oftentimes, right, like if you're looking for an eventual exit, right, that investor coming in, the someone buying you guys out, right? Um, they don't want to see all their eggs in one basket, right? They're saying, oh, hey, you've built this business and it's only in the US and it's very successful in the US. But at a certain point, there might be a limit to how high or how big you grow in one market, right?
Mhm.
So their next question will be like, hey, how do I get to the next market? How many more markets can I plug your product, your brand, your equity into, right? And so like if you haven't proven that out to them, right, before they try to acquire you, they have to do it. And if they have prove it out, they don't know it's going to work, then that's just a lower multiple for you, right? You might be trying to go for that 5 to 8 range, and now they're like, well, yeah, maybe get a 2, right? So that's where we're coming at, right? Like, hey, how do you show them that you can do this not just on Amazon or not just on Shopify, but maybe Shopify and Amazon in the US, right? So you have D2C, you have your own data, and you can also go into like a UK, EU, Canadian, Australian marketplace, right? All sort of like English speaking for the most part, where you can sort of like prove to them like, hey, like I have 10-20% of my business in another market, because hey, what if the US economy goes down a little bit, but the other ones can buttress you a little bit from like just not free fall, but a too big of a dip here in your own business.
Yeah, makes sense. By the way, quick side note on current event here. I was seeing, speaking of which, Amazon inked the deal, I think literally just in the last couple of days as we're recording this, to carry one of the NFL playoff games next year. And the implications of this, Curtis, are actually huge. And not only was it a $110 million investment for one game, but the more interesting part of it is that actually it'll be a positive ROI investment for Amazon. I was talking to an expert about it this morning, and the thing he said is, guys, Amazon is nursing this first party sales data, and is this then going to be able to pivot and create customized ads for each of the feeds. And so you think about what people pay right now to have a Super Bowl ad. I can tell you right now, Seller Accountant was not a Super Bowl advertiser, right? But that number is actually going to go up because Amazon, as a playoff advertising partner, is going to be able to give customized experiences to each viewer in the country and in the world. Right. And so the implications for that are really huge. And again, kind of lean into your question, Curtis, which is we've got to build sturdy, resilient, sustainable business models that are not flimsily predicated on one or two assumptions. They're not 100% dependent on Amazon's choosing to be nice to us at a given moment in time. And then I think something that we may want to consider testing, because we let this go. I'm going to be honest with you. We let international expansion go during the heat of the pandemic because we were getting irrational multiples to not have as much exposure with smaller channels. But now that that's regressing back to normal, it makes a ton of sense to consider an EU, UK, Asian expansion. Give me some insights into what you're learning. What are you learning about? I don't know. Maybe let this be broad. What are you learning about international expansion for a brand that you think would be helpful for our audience?
Yeah, I think the core thing, right, from like our customers, our partners, like people we work with to help other brands expand, is like, by and large, almost all of them say, do it slowly. Do it like as slowly as possible, right? Like things will take longer than you expect, regardless of what you're doing, from like the shipping, the compliance, and the VAT tax, and all the other setup things, right? But even from a sales perspective, right? Like, hey, if it goes faster than you expect, that's great news, right? But you don't want to be like having like pallets of product marooned on a country, right? Expecting this multiple to come through like instantly, expecting all the sales to rush into you just because like you're running the same playbook, right? So like almost every single one says like, hey, do a little test, right? Go out there and like, hey, maybe you're not gonna make any money because you're gonna ship like a box, right? A box of something over there, right? But that's not the point, right? Your point is just to see like if it might even work, right? Like, hey, like and obviously there's definitely industries and US centric things that don't work, like lawnmowers, right? That's not really a big thing in other markets, right? Like the US has lots of lawn care things and stuff, but like that's just not a thing in other like more urban, densely, configured cities and marketplaces, right? But this is why you test, right? Because you don't really know what's going to like sort of resonate in other markets. And yeah, I think that like without knowing exactly what the customer's doing and what they're selling, like start as small and slowly as possible, right? So you don't, because again, right, like margins are tight. Like you're trying to count every dollar. You're trying to be more responsible now with your business. And it'd be irresponsible for me to say, yeah, just go for it, right? Put $1 million into it. You'll be fine, right? That just like sounds like just bad advice. I'm sure you wouldn't give your clients that advice either.
No, and in fact, one of your Bay Area, I guess, colleagues there is a Stanford professor named Jim Collins, who his books about this talk a lot about firing bullets before you fire cannonballs. So how do you calibrate your strategy?
Yeah.
You get customer feedback as quickly as possible, and Now again, Coca-Cola's bullet is going to be different. That's going to be a $20 million bullet. Seller accountant's bullet might be a $1,000 bullet. I can place a test. I can send a new product into the market, and I'm going to be, just really aggressively measuring the efficacy of that. So that's one thing. One thing is to have the minimum viable test.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is to be really diligent to measure the efficacy of the test before you go further. Anything else you would say that would be helpful for someone considering expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just going to talk to experts, right? Like, hey, like talk to Tyler, talk to like people like me, just because there's going to be a lot of like and I think this space more than a lot of other spaces has just a lot of like sort of experts, right? A lot of gurus and experts, and not everyone's an expert and everyone's a guru, but you're going to need to talk to like some professionals here, right? And talk to a few of the same ones. Talk to a couple, right? VAT tax experts, so you don't get your butt chewed off by a foreign government later on, right? We're not doing your due diligence here, right?
Yep.
Talk to someone who actually knows about compliance if you're doing like a consumable, a makeup product, right? Because like again, that'll just take longer than you expect, right? But you're gonna, again, this is part of the process, right? You have to build out sort of like this list of experts you want to talk with, so you know who's actually giving good advice, bad advice, cross-check the advice. But I mean, just take it slow, right? Because it is a big step, but it could be a very lucrative step for you.
Well, and another thing I would just add to that, because you peaked this when you made your last comment there, Curtis, is I happen to have the chance to go to Prague for an international kind of European-based Amazon seller conference here in a few weeks. Probably shortly after this episode will drop. And if you're serious about EU, fly to the EU. Like if you're serious about the UK, go find some sellers to meet with that are doing it. Because this is something I found about this e-commerce community, Curtis, is that okay, guys don't want you stealing their IP. No one likes that. That sucks.
Yeah.
But you'll find a lot of guys out there that are really collaborative. They're like, no, we get it. We get it, mate. We love what you're trying to do. Don't screw this up and don't screw this up. And finding community that can be kind of a sounding board in addition to because a lot of gurus want to get paid to be gurus. It's really nice to find guys that are organically doing the stuff you're doing, right, and are willing to tell you what they really screwed up, what their biggest mistakes are. And for what it's worth, that's been one of my biggest tools as I built my companies. Is I try to call competitors, and I'm like, hey, you know what? In fact, when I started Seller Accountant, Curtis, my first phone call was to the largest competitor in my space, and I don't know why he picked up the phone, but he did. And I was like, hey man, I might compete with you one of these days. I don't even have a business card right now. I'm just trying to learn what makes you tick, homie. What makes you do what you're doing? And to his credit, he spent like an hour with me unpacking what he does. And I've heard this over and over again from successful 9-10 figure investors who, when people ask him like, hey, do you like hate it when people ask you how you were successful? Almost all of them are like, no, people are idiots. They never ask me. Like, I wish they would. Like, it's not easy, but it's simple. And I like sharing the knowledge. I think there was an interview I heard with Mr. Beast, who is something along these lines, where he's like, I just wish people would ask me more often with humility what it looks like to grow in this area. And guess what? I'll tell them, because I love this stuff. And right, you'll find that with everyone from Warren Buffett to somebody who's super small time like me and Curtis, right? Just get around people who are willing to talk shop. And I think that could work internationally as well.
No, I mean, I agree, right? Like, I mean, I think people are just, like people who have success want to share success, right? It's inherently like, I'm a very much like people are good sort of, like outlook on life, right? And yeah, no one wants to steal your ideas and yada, yada, yada. All that stuff is just like bad. But like by and large, right, I feel like people are good, right? And so if you go with that attitude of people are being good, like, if people like hit me up all the time, right? So my background is like in partnerships and in tech and that sort of thing, right? And I talk with other people as well who are like, smaller companies, right? I have a history of working with a really small seed-stage companies and whatever it is. And they're always asking like, hey, how'd you do X, Y, and Z? How do you do this? What should I even do? Like, well, talk to your customer, right? Like really, really basic things that everyone does. And no matter what you're doing and what you're selling, right? It's like, talk to your customer, ask them why they don't like your thing or why they didn't buy your thing. Right. But, I think it doesn't cost me anything to share that. And like, you're not actually like competing with me, right? Like there's enough customers in the world, right? Like, I'm sure, like, I don't know who you called that first time, but I'm assuming they're still doing quite well for themselves and you didn't actually inhibit their business growth at all.
Well, and actually, the conversation we had this morning was one that was so resonant. This is why I just recommend this so often on this show, guys. Find some kind of a roundtable or mastermind of peers. It doesn't matter if you're in a partnership development role at a fintech company like Curtis is, or whether you're just starting your company, whatever it is, whatever your construction or accounting or whatever it is, or if you're, an 7, 8, 9 figure e-commerce brand owner, finding a tribe of people who you can bitch to when things are hard
Yeah.
and who you can celebrate with when things are good. Because I think that's one of the parts of being a CEO that's really hard is like, Curtis, I'll be honest with you, there's some days where like even now, and thankfully I've had a pretty decent run as an entrepreneur, but like, man, there's still those like fetal position days, homie, where I'm like, bro, what am I doing? Like, just go get a job, man. People will pay you to do stuff and you
Yeah.
don't have to hold the bag and the debt and everything else. And then there's other days where I'm like, what? I just had a like unbelievable day for my family's net worth. And I don't want to feel like a total like tool talk. I need people in my life that I can talk about those things with.
Right. Yeah.
I got to find a
Yeah.
tribe is my point.
I remember whatever it was. I mean, I heard this when I was a kid, right? Basically, like, like you are who you're surrounded by. Like closest 5 people you interact with is who you're going to be,
That's right.
right? And like, I don't know, like, do you have kids? I actually we didn't even cover this. Yeah,
I
so
do.
this is the whole thing, right? Like, I have 2 boys right now, and I'm very, very cognizant of like who are they hanging around with. I mean, they're only 5 and 7, so they're all just like
Right.
little kids.
Right.
But like, it's definitely true when I was growing up, right? Like, if I had like friends who weren't very academically focused and weren't very whatever it is, I would sort of regress to the mean, right? And then, but as I made like friends who were very academically very progressive and very, opportunistic and goal oriented, like I would want to keep up with my friends, right? And this feels true because like being a CEO is a very lonely job, right? Like you
Yep.
are the boss, right? And your kids don't care, right? And your wife cares, but she doesn't care like the way like you care, right? That sort of thing.
Right.
That's a very different type of caring, right? In this sort of like the dynamics of the relationship, and you don't want her invested in this in the same way you are either, because that's just like too many eggs in
Sure.
one basket
Yeah,
again, right?
and some of it's like also just an anxiety brush where like, especially for, you know, like my wife works a lot. She sacrifices a lot by working a lot less so that I can be free to do the things I'm doing in my business.
Mhm.
And like it's not kind of me to like dump some of the stress on her that's inherent
Exactly.
because she may feel like powerless on a given day to do anything about it. Like, okay, dude, like, sorry, like, I'm so sorry you're stressed out today. And like, so the idea, like, hey, we may not make payroll next week is something that isn't a great discussion. Now you get to have a couple of those with your wife, but I would say after the second or third one, she's like, bro, you just need to go figure this out and quit bringing the stress to me.
Yeah, I mean, like, like she's there to listen, of course, right, and
Of
all
course.
that stuff. But like, she actually cannot help you with the thing, right?
Yeah,
It's like that's the thing. It's like this is your thing, right? Like it's like this is my job. Like I talked to my wife about my job, but like she can't really do anything for me and my job, right? Like I have work to do, and she can give me
that's
an
right.
idea or two, but she's not actually going to do the work for me, right? That's not what this is about, right? So again, right? It's all
Yep.
like this sort of thing, like where like yes, find a tribe, right? Like find people
Mhm.
who you can talk to this about, who have those going through the exact same things. And if you build a tribe with you of that community that's like just a little bit ahead of you, right? A little bit ahead of you, you will have to catch up, right? And
That's
that's a
right.
really great motivator to keep up with your friends who are like, one digit above you, right? That's just yeah. You're at one, they're at two. You gotta get to two, right? And then they're at four, and you gotta get to four now. And then you
Yep.
just keep going.
I love it. I love it. Listen, I want to hear a little bit more about Airwallex because I'm just not as familiar with the service product. Give us kind of the quick, like what's the person going through who's listening to this where she needs to go check out Airwallex and take a look at this product.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different things. So I'll give you some just really broad strokes here, right? So Airwallex is like 8 years old now.
Okay.
So we were founded in Australia. So your audience, if they're mainly US based, they probably haven't heard of us yet because we've only been in the US market about 2 years, right?
Okay. Got it.
So we're at 1,400 employees right now, right, or globally. So we're pretty big, but still growing quite a lot here, right? And we have like 14 or 15 offices around the globe as well. Right, we're based in San Francisco in the U.S. We're also like expanding to a New York and Austin office later this year. So
Mhm.
we're like just going right at this point. So really high broad strokes, right? So like as mentioned earlier, right, we make global payments simple, right?
Mhm.
So what you can do with Airwallex, right, is you can create like actual local bank accounts around the world in like 15 different markets that allow you to collect and hold like for like currency in those markets indefinitely, right? In like an actual bank in that market, right? So we have like 60 or 70 like global banking partners, right? So that allows you to transfer from one currency into another currency, just like USD to EU or whatever it is, on like Airwallex rails, right? Which means for free, right? Which is nice. Everyone likes free.
Yeah.
So that makes it for free, right? And we have like all the liquidity bars that makes our FX like basically the market leading rates in the market, right? But for like the business user, like your audience, right? We have like integrations with like QuickBooks and Xero and NetSuite, right? So NetSuite's probably the higher end of the spectrum here. We have a bill pay solution. We have expense management solution, we have virtual physical cards, right? So we're really building this entire suite of solutions, not just like, oh, the FX thing, right? To help you manage your business all in one place. Because if you're at that range, you're global, you don't want to have to deal with like 5 different bank accounts and the bank accounts are taking money, or you don't have to deal with forced currency conversions, taking like 3% each swipe on each way, right? You're just trying to like make your life a little bit easier and have everything go into QuickBooks, and then you don't have to worry about things, right? And it's a much nicer way to like sort of like live your life, hopefully. And we work with companies like big and small here, right, to sort of help them pay out and pay ins and those sort of things.
I mean, it's interesting. You had some peers that were doing this heavily and kind of lost their way during the pandemic, and some of them are no longer with us anymore. The
Yep.
artist formerly known as. So it's refreshing to hear that there are still solutions that are thriving. Grateful to get to learn a little bit more about Airwallex. So yeah, guys. I mean, listen. This is my advice to you. You're not going to capture the kind of multiple upon exit that you want to with your business unless you look carefully at owning more of the value chain. That means we're going to have to get better at managing our own logistics. We can't depend on Amazon for everything. We're going to have to look at additional marketplaces for our products if they're good products. And if they're not products that can scale internationally, we may need to take a closer look at developing products that are building in better ROI. And I just think it's great, Curtis, to have tools like this in our back pocket, really, that we can pull out when it comes time to do that expansion and really try to capture the maximum margin. It sounds like the expense ratios are really low with it as well, which is great.
Yeah, it's just we're here. We totally understand. Like we're back office, right? Like this
Yeah.
is stuff that helps your business run smoother on the back end of things while you manage the growth, right? And all you really care about is just like making sure the money's where it's supposed to be, right? And so we make sure your money's where it's supposed to be and it gets to where it needs to go, right? But we do a really really good job at that, right? So yeah.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay. Hey, final question I ask everyone who joins the Return on Podcast show is, it's an ROI question, of course. And it's what's a practice? What's a habit? What's a hack? You've got a 5 and 7-year-old. I've got a 9 and 11-year-old. So you and I are in the same similar life stage here,
Yeah.
where what's something that you do in your life regularly, Curtis, that gives you a fairly strong return on investment?
I mean, like I think I try to spend as much time with my kids as possible, right? And that's an easy return on investment for me, right? I am heavily invested in my children, like maybe to a healthy degree, right? I'm looking at all the things that I did wrong. I'm like, okay, you're gonna do better than this, right? You're gonna have like a work ethic and stuff like that, right? Because I was a lazy child and that sort of thing. But I think for my work and my career and sort of thinking about like life stuff, and just like building your business, right? I think there's like no greater teacher than doing, right? Like I am a big proponent of like just going through whatever it is at least one time pass, so you can at least learn about it all the way through, right? My dad actually said this when I was a kid to me. It's like, if you go open a restaurant, right, you actually need to know all the jobs in the restaurant, right? You got to be a waiter and the busboy and the cook and the chef and the prep and the janitor and the cashier. Because like if you don't know all those roles, you don't know if anyone's actually doing a good job or not of it, right? You don't know if like maybe the waiter's stealing money from you or the cook's doing some like not cooking the right dishes that doesn't taste the right way, right? And
Mhm.
that's like what everyone on this podcast is doing, right? You're building this business, and hopefully it's a long lasting business. But until you actually like know all the little facets of it, right? And leave the accounting to Tyler, of course, but all the facets of it, right? Like you might miss something and something that might not be operating in the way you wanted to because you just didn't know enough about it, right? So I think getting those reps in is just really, really important.
Love it. Get those reps in, learn the weeds so that you can properly outsource. I will say just my personal story there is that I, as a leader, am such a visionary naturally, Curtis, that my temptation is constantly to delegate like yesterday. Like I have to fight the temptation to be like, oh, I'm going to empower this team. And I end up hurling a mess over the fence and hoping that they can figure it out. Have been taught, because those reps are expensive when you do it that way, that my team needs me to hang with it a little bit longer than my
Yeah.
instinct is so that I can give them a clear picture. Like they don't need me to tell them how to do it because they're better at it than I am normally, but they need me to understand the why on a visceral enough level that I can explain success to them and we can agree on that. If
Mhm.
not, we kind of set ourselves up for failure. And so this is your point is a well taken one for me. The discipline of leading with enough experiential buy-in that I'm not just hurling a mess at willing people that want to join my mission or your mission
Right.
will fail miserably if you don't understand why they're doing different elements of the business. I think that's really handy, dude. And I like it. Not to mention accountability. Like obviously you can't hold someone accountable for something that you don't understand the basics of. And yeah, man, love it, dude. Curtis, you're the man. I really appreciate you joining Return on Podcast today. I'm going to make sure that anyone who sees this on YouTube or listens to it has access to your links where they can get a hold of you. Any final words for the group before we close shop today?
No, I mean, just, thank you very much, Tyler, for your time. This has been, really appreciated here. Thank you.
You got it, Curtis. And for those of you guys who have made it 30 minutes into this episode, Curtis and I just appreciate it. Your time is valuable. And the fact that you would invest it with us, we are sincerely hope that you do get a return on this podcast and on this investment. Until next week, hope you guys kill it. Take care.